Obrigado. How'd I do? That's the only word I know. As I was preparing to come here, I left Monday. I live in Portland, Oregon, in the United States. And I was sitting at the airport looking out at the rain, because that's all it does in Portland is rain. And I was thinking about how I was going to be here. And then actually I got out my phone. I thought I'd read to you the searches I did on Google. How to learn Portuguese in 4 days. Portuguese different than Spanish. And then, como se dice guilt in Portuguese? Guilt, yes. So I feel guilty that I'm not here speaking your language. Thank you for listening in my language. So I work for SendGrid. I previously worked for Programmable Web, a directory of APIs. And so you can see this talk is about how APIs make you special. But by show of hands, who is already special here? Okay, there are a few who are willing to admit it. Yes. Yeah, the talk could probably be titled How APIs Help You Focus on What Makes You Special, but that's kind of a longer title. So how APIs make you special. I know it was listed at some point in the program as how APIs change the web and mobile, and we're going to talk about that too. First, I want to tell you a story about a couple of other special people who I met in 2010. That's Chuck Groom on the right, and Gaurav Oberoi is the one hovering above the ground there. That's not the only thing that makes him special. But these two guys are special. They created a company called Precision Polling that helps do telephone polls, telephone surveys. And what they did was, first they had to build this massive voice over IP network to be able to have voice calls anywhere in the world and be able to conduct surveys using that. And then on top of that massive network, Chuck and Gaurav built a very simple front end that allowed someone to go and create new questions and be able to make something that then would interface with that VoIP, voice over IP network. And then, just really less than a year later, they were acquired by SurveyMonkey, which is the largest online survey service. So those are some of the things that make Chuck and Gaurav special. Now, who here thinks that that story is true? Yeah, when you ask it like that, there are a few hands that go up. Who thinks I'm lying to you? And now no one wants, okay, you think I'm lying to you. Why would I be lying to you? About what? You were just joking? Because I was going to give you something for admitting that I lied. So this is something that I never would use in Portland because it rains all the time. And they're sunglasses. So even for just being a joker, I'll give it to you.
Thank you.
So I was lying about one thing in that story. And that is Chuck and Gaurav did not have to make a worldwide voice over IP network because it was already made for them. So let me take a chance and I'll tell you the true version of that story. I met Chuck Groom and Gaurav Oberoi in 2010. They were working on a startup called Precision Polling. And what that did was it used an API called Twilio to be able to send and receive voice calls. And then they built that simple interface, the simple front end, on top of Twilio. And yes, they were acquired by SurveyMonkey, which is the largest online survey company. So I tell you this story as an example of the power of APIs, and what I hope that all of you, when you go on to create what you create, whether it's a startup or for a company, I hope that you will follow in the steps of Chuck and Gaurav to focus on what makes you special. And that's what I'm going to talk about here today. Because what Chuck and Gaurav did is really an example of the way that architecting applications is changing. So this is your standard developer. I think we can agree, probably a junior developer, I would say. And when this guy is coding, he is maybe using SendGrid, I would hope, for email. He's hosting his application in the cloud, maybe using Facebook and Twitter for social login to be able to get additional information about his customers. And then, yeah, he's using his own databases and services that he builds to be able to also build his application. But it's architected this way for a reason. So today, I figured since I'm at a university, I would use academic departments here. So I'll start by talking about history and the history of APIs, then economics and how APIs help you to focus on what makes you special. And then I would say physics, but I didn't know what to fit into there, so I thought I would do psychics instead. And I apologize, that's an English joke. But again, obrigado is all I know. So that's what we're going to talk about here today, those three academic departments. So when you talk about history, you have to go way back. And really what I want to get across here is how, for a long time, technology has helped people be more creative. You're able to leverage your creativity with technology. Now, way back in the time when there were people, who remembers when there were scribes, when you had to, okay, good, no hands there, not even you, no. Okay, I don't have a second pair of sunglasses, so. So there would be people this guy's specialty was copying books, right? It's not necessarily a technology, but the people who wrote those didn't have to copy the books. They could write it once and then move on to the next thing that they were going to talk about, that they were going to write about. Well, eventually technology did help with publishing, right? The printing press. Who remembers when the print? No, I'm kidding. So the printing press came along, and then more people could be creative, could share their knowledge with the help of technology. Well, fast forward a lot to desktop publishing. So this is when personal computers came around, and suddenly you could write, if you had access to a personal computer, maybe at school, at work, or maybe you had one yourself, and anyone could publish. You didn't even have to have access to a printing press anymore. Well, fast forward again to the web and blogging. And really, the web is the world's fastest fast forward button. Because we've even seen things change since the beginning of the web, the beginning of blogging, which is less than 15 years old. Back in 1999, you'd have to hand code the HTML in every single blog post and connect it to the last one. Well, then of course now, today we've got WordPress's famous 5-minute install, right? So again, this is technology helping people be more creative. And now we have APIs, and APIs, I would argue, are doing the same thing. They're technology and they're helping you, even you who are technologists who could do what maybe the API does, but they're helping you focus and be more creative. So a lot of times, when you as computer scientists probably have an idea of APIs, I feel like I need to be a little bit explicit about what I'm talking about, because these are web APIs, internet-connected APIs, not necessarily programming language APIs. And of course, we all probably know it stands for Application Programmer Interface, and you probably also know that if you tell someone that, they'll look at you like this. But it's an interesting term, and it's interesting how there are so many different ways to define it, even those of us who don't react like this. And so what I did was I went to an API conference. This is a conference of just people who love APIs a lot. It's the dorkiest of the dorks are at this conference. And I went up to them and I asked them what an API is. And so I thought we could have a listen here.
What is an API? An API is a way for two pieces of software to easily communicate with each other over a predefined interface, which is in the term, application programming interface. So once the interface is defined, then two pieces of software or two devices or two servers can talk to each other more easily and share information.
For me, an API is it's an opportunity to express and magnify the things that, as a business, you do best. Frees you up to focus on your core competencies while letting others leverage theirs to expand your business.
Very cut and dry. An API is an application programming interface. It lets you interface and grab data or put data into a service.
What's an API?
It's the means to access some content or functionality on a device, on a web server, on a descriptive interface.
To my mind, an API is an interface enabling to website, to application, or to things to talk together in an automated and programmable way.
I think more romantically, an API allows brand new experiences, brand new opportunities for developers, allows mashups of services that have previously not even thought of or dreamt of, and it makes the internet better.
What is an API?
An API is a way for two pieces of software or services to talk to each other in a way that is agreed upon ahead of time so that they know how to look for data or how the data will be structured when it arrives over the wire, as we call it. That was horrible.
I'm sorry I missed the quotes.
It's horrible.
And right after that, I promised John I would never show that to anyone. So there you have 5 experts with, I counted 7 different definitions of what an API is. There were some similarities, interface thrown in there, right? So I like to tell people, when I'm talking about what an API is, and I know many of you might know, but this could help you describe it to others. I like to start with what it enables. What does an API make possible? Because APIs can share data. Now, it might be, that's location data, kind of coffee shops, stock data. And the one on the right is interesting. That's your own data, right? You tell Facebook, it's okay to share this with this application, and then that application can pull your friends list and many other pieces of data from your account. APIs can share functionality. I love maps. I wrote a book on mapping APIs, and I love the way that they can change how data is shown. So the functionality they're providing is this geographic representation. In the case of Salesforce, it allows you access to the application programmatically. So you don't have to be there typing in a new sales lead. That can happen in some automated way. So you can share functionality in an API too. Intelligent calculations are some of my favorites. Has anyone seen full contact before? Have you heard of that? So full contact, through the API call, you send an email address, and then it tells you everything it possibly can about the person behind that email address. Their name, male or female, their age, maybe their social network. It might be a little bit creepy, but it's so powerful too. And this is intelligent calculations it's doing behind the scenes and then handing over to you. The Alchemy API does a lot of natural language processing, where you can give it a bunch of text and it will send back the category that it thinks what you're discussing there, what that body of text is discussing. And then Wolfram Alpha. Some of the most interesting things that Siri does is really just an API call to Wolfram Alpha. Things like, how old is Mark Zuckerberg? It will tell you. Intelligent calculations. Then there's API as a platform. We're all familiar with Facebook. I know at one point I spoke to a science journal that also was sort of building Facebook for science journals, where you could put applications into the web interface of that. But so Facebook allows you to build your applications within Facebook if you want. And then APIs enable reaction, and this is one of the really interesting ways that that I think is on the horizon of more real-time webs. And did anyone do anything with Meteor? Or is that after this? That's tonight. So, I mean, Meteor is a great example of being able to show this real-time data. So the way that Twitter tells you when there are new tweets to view, or at SendGrid we have an event API that sends you data as you have it. If someone unsubscribes, it sends that to you immediately. If you have bounced emails, the same way. So these webhooks that enable reaction, a great thing that APIs do. So those are some of the ways that APIs work. And as you can tell, I get excited about those ways. So let's dive into the history of them a little bit. Some of the first web APIs are here. eBay, this is in the early 2000s, maybe 2000. eBay created a way to be able to search auctions and add new auctions. And now I think the bulk of eBay's income comes from power sellers using tools that are built on top of the eBay API. Salesforce, I mentioned a little bit before. They were big in going away from installed software and going with software as a service, which is why the no software is in their logo. And then they went a step further by making it a platform so that you could automate your interaction with that software. And Amazon also allows you to search their huge database of products and then be able to pull out that information there. And hopefully, Amazon hopes someone will buy something that you pull out of there. And then fast forward a few years, it felt like a long time, 5 years, to Mashup Mayhem. And this is when Google Maps became such a big deal. And this is one of the first mashups with Google Maps. This is called Housing Maps. Has anyone seen this? It has Craigslist data that it then, so if you're looking for a rental, say a rental, you can pull that data from Craigslist, then it shows it to you geographically there. So then along the same lines, chicagocrime.org went to the Chicago police website, scraped down any crimes recently, made those into geographic points, plotted them so that you could see where's the recent crime been in my neighborhood. Each of these cases, these existed before the official Google Maps API came out. These guys reverse engineered Google Maps in order to embed it into their own websites to be able to create these really great ways of being able to visualize data that before you weren't sure where it was. You knew what it was, not where it was. Well, then, of course, Google Maps did eventually come out with their own official Maps API. And then that's when the Maps mayhem started. That's when people started putting any data that didn't belong on maps. It was on a map, darn it, because it was a great time and it was such a visual API. And now there are well over 1 million websites with Google Maps. So after the sort of Maps mayhem, we had, of course, that Facebook platform that I talked about. And the people rushed to that the same way they rushed to Maps. It was, I want to put my application inside Facebook. Even if it doesn't belong there, I'm going to put it inside Facebook. And so many applications, of course, now, many, but went to Facebook. And really, these are both examples of APIs as blank canvases, right? You come and bring what you want to this platform. put your stuff on a map, put your stuff on Facebook. API as a blank canvas became sort of the model that companies tried to use. So I showed you that graph, I think, of all of those APIs. Well, that huge explosion, that came after these two examples of APIs as a blank canvas. And companies thought, this is great, I will create my API, it will be a perfect world. Everyone's going to use my API and build something really awesome on top of it. Well, in a lot of those cases, unfortunately, it looks a little bit more like this. And so there's been a little bit of a backlash to that sort of wide open, wonderful API as a blank canvas kind of world. Even big companies. So Google, who kind of started it with their Maps API, well, they've had some things they've called spring cleanings, which has been them killing off services and APIs. So Google has over 100 APIs. Darn near a third of them are no longer around. You can't use them anymore. Twitter pretty famously pulled back on their API, making it harder for developers to have a way to show tweets without doing it in a very specific way. And the Next Web even said, Twitter wants 1 billion users, and it's prepared to sacrifice developers to get there. Sacrifice developers. So that's not that wide open blank canvas of a world, right? Netflix in the US, a video streaming provider, used to have a wide open API as well. And you could find your queue of things you want to view or things you have viewed, that sort of thing, add others to it using the API. Well, Netflix still very much is an API company, but not for just any developer to use. They have many devices, about 1,000 different device types that they use, and so it's sort of, the API is their internal way of being able to manage that. So while this sort of API as a blank canvas has dissipated, there's sort of a new idea of what's working, and that's a different metaphor. It's the API as the building block, a piece of your application that you connect others together with. And so as I get into the second point here about economics, I'll be speaking about that sort of building block API, which is different than the kind of blank canvas. So this is what programmers do. This is an architect, actually, but as programmers, we know that a lot of programming is architecting. Of course, if you really want to know what a programmer, if you think of what someone would normally think of a programmer, it's maybe a little bit more like this, right? I showed that at a conference once, and a woman in the front row said, "Is that you?" And I vowed then and there to never show it again, because clearly I don't wear glasses. So in addition to being an architect, programming can be this. Programming can be art, and it can be architecture. It can be both. In fact, Y Combinator's founder, Paul Graham, said something similar in an essay about hackers and painters. Has anyone read that essay? So he says the similarity is that painters and hackers are trying to make good things. I read that as be creative. Okay, so with that in mind, I move to the true economics. Anyone know this Italian economist? Yeah, you know him personally? Professor, I didn't think you. Yes, that is Vilfredo Pareto, whose Pareto Principle says that 80% of effects come from 20% of causes. And he showed this especially in income, that 80% of income comes from 20% of the people. And it's been shown that it sort of holds up in many areas. And I think it's interesting because I think we have something similar going with what APIs can do for us. We've heard of software as a service, maybe infrastructure as a service. Well, how about Pareto as a service? Where 80% of what you need to do, there's already something to do it. You have APIs and cloud services, the building blocks that you can put together, and then all you have to do yourself is the stuff that makes you special. Your code doesn't have to reinvent the wheel of the 80% that's already there. And in those many APIs, we're seeing this in infrastructure especially, because infrastructure solves really hard and sometimes boring developer problems. Things like sending email and making sure it gets there. I mentioned Twilio earlier for their voice API that's precision polling built on top of. Twilio also has an SMS API. So in this case, you're sending a text, and you don't have to have the relationships with every carrier in every country. Twilio is making those relationships. And with push notifications on mobile, UrbanAirship, which is based in Portland, by the way, UrbanAirship creates a way to have these push notifications and to be cross-platform. They work with Windows Phone, they work with Android, they work with iOS. Of course, storage and computing. These days, very few are thinking about rolling their own solutions for that. Instead, you are building on top of the cloud, right? So these infrastructure APIs, all making it very easy to get started because you don't have to build this stuff. And then last week on an airplane, I was reading Fast Company magazine, and Om Malik from GigaOM had a I almost said post, I think in blogging terms, right? Had an article about building it yourself and really praising Facebook, which built its own servers, and Apple, which built its own chips, its own for the latest iPhone. And I was thinking to myself, boy, this is kind of the opposite of what I'm going to say in Lisbon, right? But it makes sense. It makes sense that Facebook, for their next step, they needed to be able to have servers that would scale with Facebook's scale. And to do that, they had to build their own. Apple, to be able to get the efficiency and the power in a small enough package for its iPhone, it had to eventually build its own. Suppliers were not able to give them what they needed. But I would argue that there are maybe a handful of other companies in the world that should be making decisions like Apple and Facebook make. Instead, I think the rest of us should be asking ourselves the question, can we build it? Yeah, maybe we can. We're smart computer scientists and computer engineering students, right? Yeah, we probably could. But do we need to? Probably not. If it's already solved, why solve it again? And that's coming back to focusing on what makes you special. Don't build a microchip just to build an app for a phone, right? That doesn't make sense. You want to be as efficient as this guy and as creative as this guy. Okay, so since we're talking about economics, we have to talk about money at some point. This is the dollar, of course. Apologize for the US-centric view there. One thing on the slide. But we're talking about money. So who here has heard of the prisoner's dilemma? Yeah, okay, there are a couple here. So let's say that Bruno and I were criminals. And we got caught, and we got arrested, brought in, and questioned separately. So there are some different scenarios. If Bruno and I just both keep quiet like we promised, then we'll only get a year each in jail. But if you look there at the part where maybe Bruno decide, or I decide to talk, and Bruno doesn't, I get to walk, and then he gets 3 years, right? And the same is true in reverse. Or if we both talk, we get 2 years. So what this really is, why am I bringing this up? Why did I show it right after a dollar sign? The prisoner's dilemma is really game theory, and I would argue as you're thinking about APIs and which to use, that it helps to think about what the other guy would do. Because whether or not I talk is really going to be determined based on what I think Bruno is going to do. So consider the business models, and there are many of them that an API could have. So how does the API make money? Because they want to if you're using their API, they want to make sure that you are providing value to them. And of course, the opposite is that you want to make sure you get value from that API as well. Well, this is, I would guess that no one can read this in the back. And it's a whole bunch of different business models, and it's from a presentation by John Musser, who founded Programmable Web. If you go to this address, the bit.ly/API biz models, you can get a full view of it. But I just want to talk about the top tier there. The 4 basic business models. Free, developer pays, developer gets paid, indirect. Free, sort of a strange business model, but again, in the world of blank canvas APIs, there are still some APIs that are provided for free. And so that's something that you want to consider as you're using it, is what value are you providing? You're not paying them. Are they making money in some way? Are they getting value from you in some other way? You want to be able to answer that, because if you use it and it goes away, like a third of the Google APIs have, then you're now having to go back and focus on what doesn't make you special, because this foundation that you were on top of just fell out of you. Then developer pays is the next one. Well, that's pretty clear to see what value they're getting at that point, right? And there are a few different ways that companies who are charging for the API go about it. It's very similar to kind of a software as a service. Well, sometimes you pay as you go, like Twilio that I showed. If you send 1 SMS, you pay for 1 SMS. If you send 10, you pay for 10. They get paid more as you grow, and hopefully as you grow, you're making enough to be able to pay them. Then kind of the tiered model is more like traditional software as a service, where you have, for a low usage, you pay just a little, and if you need additional features or more usage, you go up to the larger tier. And then, of course, the most popular version is the one with the trial, where you can try it out first and see if and build it into your application, see if it will work. And then, who here is excited about getting paid by an API, right? That's sort of the perfect win-win for everyone. So developer gets paid. That's another version of the business model. And a lot of times it looks like an affiliate model. So here, the traditional sort of affiliate approach is I have a link to Amazon or someone else, and embedded in that is some ID that is traced back to me. And I send that, and if someone makes a purchase at that store, then that store gives me a percentage of that purchase. And of course, me being able to find out what items are at that store, that's all driven by the API. But I know we're not in the psychic section yet, but one area that I expect to pick up is sort of the more full API model, where the API calls are getting you the items in the store, but then you're also able to make those purchases from within the API, which is much more powerful because in the traditional model, you throw a user over to them, you wash your hands, and you hope that something comes back. In this, the user is entirely within your application. So I expect to see more that are like that because it raises the win-win. You get paid when you make them money, and if you make them more money, you get paid more. And so for each of these APIs, this is actually an outdated slide. There are now over 11,000 APIs. So for all 11,000 of those, you can do some thinking about, okay, maybe you don't put it in a specific business model application, but you think about what value are they getting from me? Why do they want me to use their API? And if you can answer that question, you're much more likely to come up with a much better foundation, much better part of that 80% for what you're building. All right. Can everyone do this with me? Come on, you can do it. And I want you to all think of a company. Think of just any company. Okay. And yep, they have an API. Thank you for allowing us to have that direct mind connection. The one you're thinking of, they have an API because now everyone has an API. I talked about those 11,000 APIs. Those are the ones that are public, that are known, that are discoverable. But trust me, everyone has one. I'll tell you a story that I think shows this. So I was going downtown Portland to meet with a friend for lunch. And I arrived at the restaurant, and he sent me a text and said, oh, sorry, I'm running late, but here's my location, using an Glimpse, an application that lets you do that. So I could see I could see he was 10 minutes away, right? I could see that. And somewhere around the same time, I got a notification from this shared shopping list I use with my wife saying, okay, yeah, we need eggs. And she knew I was out and maybe I could get it on my way back home. And so then as I'm waiting for my friend, who's still not very close, I started playing my word game. And it occurred to me that really all of those are actually using an API. There has to be some way for it to share that data, to be able to get my friend's location, get the item from the shopping list, or send my really good move and beat my nephew in Words with Friends. Those are all using an API. A few years ago, there was a US senator who was ridiculed for saying that the internet is a series of tubes. That became an internet meme. There were things like this, making fun of him. There were cats, of course, making fun of him. And I admit that at the time I made fun of him too. But then as I reflect on that now, I'm ready to admit to you that he was right. The internet is a series of tubes. Those tubes are APIs. And really, when I talk about this architecture that this young man is using, really, those are a series of tubes. Those are APIs connecting everything together. Because anytime an app on a mobile phone does anything interesting, it has to use an API. It has to be sending data back and forth. There are a few examples of some companies that are doing this with public APIs. So NPR is National Public Radio in the United States. They created an API, and they created this concept of, they call COPE, create once, publish everywhere. And so then they built their entire suite of mobile applications, their mobile site, everything on top of that one API. And so even though at National Public Radio, they are not experts in iOS or Android, they were able to build applications because they gave them the tubes to be able to do that. So someone who's an expert in BlackBerry could build on top of this API, this create once, publish everywhere. In fact, NPR even has an application for the Ford Sync, which is like an app platform for cars. So there's an NPR app in many new Ford cars, which I think really shows that we're at the state of the art when we've got radio in a car, right? Speaking of cars, iFixit has a database of many, many ways of fixing things, whether it's changing the oil in a car or fixing a broken iPhone front or something like that, right? So they have an API that is public and available to anyone, and then they've also built their own apps. And if you feel comfortable putting an expensive tablet inside your car, you can do that, and that will be driven by the iFixit API. And Foursquare, it is a way to share your location with your friends, and Foursquare actually builds the API first. So if it is adding a new feature to its applications, it goes first into the API, and then everything is built on top of it. Now, I could go on and on for every app in the App Store, and I think I have time to do that. So, okay, just one more. Instagram for sharing sharing your photos, I guess videos now. Well, before it was bought by Facebook for $1 billion, it was a hot new app, and much like Google Maps, people reverse engineered it. It didn't have, we knew it had an API because any app that does anything interesting has an API, but they hadn't made it public. But what happened was a developer with really, really good skin sniffed the traffic from Instagram to its servers and reverse engineered its API, published what they had. And this was in December of 2010. A month later, Instagram said, no, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to shut down anyone who's using this API. But they also said, I guess we better do an official one. And sure enough, the next month, they opened the public beta of the Instagram API, which is now used by many, many people. But like Google Maps, it started with developers saying, that should be an API. I should be able to get at that. I bet there's a way for me to do it. So I've been talking sort of about the API within an app, and I think Evernote is a really interesting example that as you're thinking about, yes, everyone has an API, it doesn't always make sense for them to keep it open, to bring it open. And in the case of Evernote, which has a great public API program, still 99% of traffic to that API is from its internal applications. And that makes sense, because that's what most Evernote users use. And I have a whole other talk where I show that question mark slide of what API stands for, and then I say maybe API should stand for apps, partners, and income, the 3 benefits someone gets from having an API. So if you kind of want to dive more into that piece, you can go to this website, bit.ly/the-new-API, and see some slides there about more kind of about this business side, the less technical. If you want help in talking to the less technical about APIs, you can use that. Because the old API is kind of like the painting that I showed. Canvas, there we go. It's so sometimes I don't even speak English that well, so it's I have to stretch for the words. So an old API is kind of like that, where it's wide open, but the new API is more like a knocker on a door. So you know everyone has an API. And that means that even if it's not public, there might be a way that you can knock on the door, make it public for you. So that's, again, we're looking to the future as you consider which APIs you can use to build that foundation for you. And the question that I used to get from companies was, should I have an API? And I don't get that question anymore. I instead get the question, should I open my API? Because they already know I know they have one. ESPN, I thought, did this in a really good way. Some parts of the ESPN is a sports scores and stuff. They have football in there, so you know ESPN, right? A few of them are completely available, and then there are some, you can see no checks here, they're available for premium partners. And that's a great way that they're saying, hey, this might be available, let's talk, right? So that's kind of the knocker on the door. And I think that we're going to see more open APIs, more options to use them, even if it's a knocker sort of option. And one of the reasons comes from, do you remember when Instagram got bought by Facebook? Twitter said, well, there's that thing that they can find their Twitter friends, and so they said, no, we don't like that. We're gonna, is that what you thought it was gonna be? We're gonna shut off that API access. We're gonna take that away from them because we don't like them. Well, users got so upset. And here you had, for I think the first time, normal, non-technical people saying, I want an API. Don't take that API away, I want that. They weren't saying API, of course, but that's what they meant. The small business web is a collaboration of companies that, and one of their founding principles is that they'll have APIs that they open and share with each other. And one of those companies, FreshBooks, did some analysis, and they saw that if any of their customers used a single integration, that's an application that's built on their API, if any of them used it, they were 3 times as likely to convert from a free account to a paid account. So here you have regular users asking for an API, not demanding like the Instagram users were, but asking with money. And I think as we're seeing a lot more connected devices, connected things, I've got my Fitbit here, which is tracking my steps. I can cheat. But as we have more of these things, we're going to start expecting these connections. And it's up to people like you to create these connections between all of these things. And so the ways that customers are asking for APIs, let me find Twitter friends. Let me pay you to integrate with other services. And I want my weight, say, from a wireless scale and my fitness data in one place. And I'm willing to pay you for that connection, for making those APIs work together. And lastly, there's a thing that I call unprogramming with if this then that and Zapier, and there are a few other examples of this that connect things together. So send me an SMS if the weather says that it's going to rain. Well, that's a weather API, and that's an SMS API. That's 2 APIs being connected together, but non-programmers can go and connect those together and can use those. And if there are more ways to do this, you look at the triggers in Zapier, like for Twitter, that there's a new tweet. For Google Docs, create a spreadsheet row. Those are just API calls, but they're being transformed in a way that non-programmers can use them. And non-programmers are going to expect these triggers in anything you build as well. And so this Pareto as a service, this idea that you're building on top of some APIs and then focusing on what makes you special, well, as you continue, then others are going to want to take your whole thing, your 80% plus your 20%, and make it part of their 80%. And so, as we're talking about APIs today and talking about you as users of APIs, also keep in your mind as you're thinking about the future that you might very well be a provider of APIs as well. Because remember, this is the way that applications are structured now. You're using these APIs, but these internal services, these ones that are yours, the API you need because you have a mobile app, and any mobile app that does anything interesting is going to have one, maybe those can be opened up, or at least you can put a knocker in front of it. Right? And you can focus on what makes you special, and then you can also share what makes you special. Obrigado. Hang on a second. Yes, I think I can take some questions. Yeah.
So we have time for a couple of questions. Who wants to start? Oh, Professor.
With quite a couple of the examples you've given, the providers of APIs have changed their strategy.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned Twitter, for example, but I think the same is true for others. And how does this fit into the picture you have charted?
Where that's part of your foundation?
Yeah, so I mean, what you tried to chart here is like who has the benefit, who pays for it, who gets paid.
Yeah.
So if you look at Twitter, one thing one could assume is, okay, if you're small, you're happy for everyone who provides a nice interface,
Right.
and you just care about growing the numbers.
Yeah.
And once you reach a certain size, you want to get rid of all these add-ons and just say, okay, now I'm on my own and I don't need you anymore. So the question would be, can you predict that? And is it sort of like natural, and is it unavoidable almost?
In some ways it is, unfortunately. But I think part of it is you want to try to find out what value you're providing, like I said, right? So if you can anticipate that you're not providing enough value to Twitter down the line, then maybe you choose someone else. But also, I think that companies I talked about the open door versus the knocker, and I think that that companies are seeing the examples of others having to close, that Google has had to shutter a third of what they've built, that Twitter had to pull back on the way they do it. And so companies are being more careful as they begin their API program. So I think it's less likely that you will have, that anyone who can foresee that in the future they would want to pull the API out from under you, that they will be less likely to put it as far out there as Twitter did. And so I think that hopefully there's it's still early, and hopefully that part of that dance.
Okay, you say it's a kind of a learning process also.
I think so, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions?
I love it when the audience makes the guy with the microphone run. It's my favorite.
This is more like a personal insight of yours that I would like to know. If, as you've shown from Evernote, only 1% of their APIs are made public. Would you think that it would be a best idea if at least most of these developers open up all or most of their APIs to the public?
So I think the question is, if they only have 1%, why is it even valuable for Evernote to open up?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and it comes down to the FreshBooks example that I gave, where they see that so they have a free version, they have a paid version, and if someone uses something built on top of any version, then they're more likely to pay for FreshBooks. Evernote actually just said the same thing, that they saw that 50%, so half of anyone who that used an application that was built on top of the Evernote API became an Evernote Premium user. So in that case, the Evernote API benefits them in two ways. The first is that 99%, right? They have an API, and they use it a lot with their own applications. But then that little 1%, they only give a little bit more, takes a little bit more usage, and anyone who is part of that 1% then is half of those people buy Evernote Premium. That's a pretty good argument for having an open API. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
More questions? Okay.
All right. Bashful people, I think, can go upstairs and meet me. Is that right?
Exactly.